You have been told to exercise. You have been told to eat well, to sleep 8 hours, to get morning sunlight, to stay connected to other people, to manage your stress, to breathe through your nose, to fast occasionally, to take cold showers, to spend time in nature. You have heard this from doctors, from television, from your children, from magazines, from every wellness expert who has ever stood behind a microphone. And if you are honest, if you have sat with all of it and tried to make sense of the contradictions and the overlaps and the sheer volume of advice that arrives from every direction, you have wondered why none of them can explain why it all works. Why does walking help your heart and your bones and your brain? Why does sunlight affect your sleep and your mood and your immune system? Why does loneliness damage the organs that sitting damages? Why does fasting improve the systems that exercise improves? Every piece of health advice you have ever received sounds different. Different words, different experts, different mechanisms, different magazine covers. But they converge. They always converge. On identical interventions, in identical populations, with identical outcomes. And the reason they converge has never been explained to you because the explanation requires a law of physics that nobody discusses in a doctor's office. The second law of thermodynamics. Second law states that the entropy of an isolated system never decreases. Entropy, roughly, disorder, always increases over time. Ordered structures become disordered. Concentrated energy disperses. Complex arrangements decay towards simpler ones. This is not a tendency. It is not a preference. It is the most fundamental law in physics, the only law that distinguishes past from future, the only law that has never been violated in any experiment ever conducted, the only law that Einstein said would never be overthrown. It is the reason eggs break and never unbreak. The reason heat flows from hot to cold and never reverses. The reason everything in the universe runs down. Your body is the most complex ordered structure on Earth. 37 trillion cells, each one maintaining a membrane potential of 70 millivolts across a barrier 7 nanometers thick, a voltage gradient per unit distance steeper than a lightning bolt, 100,000 kilometers of blood vessels maintaining laminar flow through tubes that branch and rejoin without turbulence, 3 billion base pairs of DNA replicating with an error rate of 1 in a billion per base pair per division, a copying fidelity that no human technology approaches. 20,000 different proteins, each folded into a precise three-dimensional configuration that a single misplaced amino acid can destroy. The amount of order in your body is staggering, more order than in any other structure the universe has produced. And the second law says all of it is under constant pressure to fall apart. Every protein in your body is being pressed toward misfolding. Every membrane toward leaking, every chromosome toward replication error, every organized structure toward disorganization. The pressure is continuous. It does not pause. It does not negotiate. It does not take weekends off. The second law is acting on every molecule in your body right now, at this moment as you listen, and it has been acting on them without interruption since the moment you were conceived. Everything your body does to keep you alive is one activity: fighting that pressure, repairing damage, replacing worn components, correcting errors, maintaining order against a constant thermodynamic drive toward disorder. Your body is not a machine that runs until it breaks. It is a machine that is constantly breaking and constantly rebuilding, and the ratio between those two rates determines everything. When rebuilding exceeds breaking, you recover. When breaking exceeds rebuilding, you decline. When they match, you hold steady. Aging is not entirely a program encoded in your genes, though genetic programs contribute to the timeline. The dominant physical pressure is the gradual shift in that ratio, the repair falling behind the damage, one system at a time, across decades. The shift is not inevitable at the rate most people experience it. The ratio is influenced by inputs. And the inputs are the interventions every doctor has told you about without explaining why they work. And every piece of health advice you have ever received, every intervention that has ever been shown to work in a controlled study, works because it tips that ratio. It either reduces the rate of damage, increases the rate of repair, or synchronizes the repair systems so they operate at maximum efficiency. The second law provides three levers. Every effective intervention pulls one of them. Think about what that means. The contradictory advice, the competing experts, the different mechanisms for different systems, all of it dissolves into one question. Does this intervention help the body fight entropy? Does it reduce damage, increase repair, or improve the coordination between them? If yes, it works. If no, it does not. The filter is binary. The physics is the filter. Movement is the first signal, and the one the body responds to most directly. Because your body does not maintain itself automatically. It maintains itself in response to mechanical demand. Wolff's law, described in the walking surface discussion, states that bone remodels along lines of mechanical stress. Stress a bone, and osteoblasts deposit mineral where the stress is highest. Remove the stress and osteoclasts disassemble the unstressed bone. The body will not spend energy maintaining order that nothing demands. Maintaining bone mineral density costs ATP. Fighting entropy at the skeletal level is an expenditure. The body makes that expenditure only where a signal, mechanical loading, tells it the expenditure is justified. Remove the signal and the body withdraws the expenditure. The bone thins. Entropy wins at the skeleton. Endothelium, the single cell layer lining every artery, described in the sitting discussion, requires the shear stress of flowing blood to produce nitric oxide, the molecule that keeps vessels dilated, anti-inflammatory, and antithrombotic. Sit still for 45 minutes and the shear stress drops below the threshold that sustains no production. The endothelium switches to an inflammatory phenotype. The vessel wall begins accumulating the molecular damage that sustained shear stress was preventing. The body will not spend energy maintaining an artery that receives no flow signal. Muscle maintains itself only under contractile load. Remove the load and sarcopenia begins. Muscle fibers atrophy, mitochondria within them decline. The metabolic capacity of the tissue decreases. The body will not spend energy maintaining contractile tissue that receives no contraction signal. Bone, artery, muscle. One physics. The body maintains order only where it receives a signal that order is needed. Movement is the signal. It tells the bones to stay dense, the arteries to stay open, the muscles to stay functional. Remove the signal, and the second law wins in every system that stops requesting maintenance. The person who stops moving has not contracted a disease. They have withdrawn the maintenance signal from every mechanical system in their body simultaneously. And the second law, which was waiting, begins reclaiming what the body is no longer defending. If you have been sitting while listening to this, your endothelium has already shifted. 45 minutes of sitting and the shear stress in your arteries has dropped below the threshold that sustains nitric oxide production. The entropy fighting machinery in your arterial walls is powering down because the flow signal that justified the expenditure has diminished. Stand up, walk. The signal returns. The machinery restarts. The second law was winning in your arteries for the duration of the sitting, and the intervention that reverses it is standing up. Every doctor you have ever seen has told you to stay active. None of them explained why the advice applies to your heart and your bones and your muscles and your brain simultaneously, why one behavior affects every system. The explanation is the second law. Your body will not maintain order without a reason. Movement is the reason. Every step, every contraction, every load is a maintenance request filed with a system that will shut down any department that stops filing requests. The doctor was right. The physics is why. You see? And sunlight is the timing signal for the entire operation. Because fighting entropy requires not only energy and signals, but coordination. The repair systems must run at the right time, in the right sequence, targeting the right damage. Your body fights entropy on a schedule. A circadian schedule governed by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, synchronized by light entering through melanopsin containing retinal cells. Cortisol peaks in the morning to mobilize energy for the day's demands. Melatonin rises at night to initiate repair, immune surveillance, and the lymphatic brain cleaning cycle described in several previous discussions. Growth hormone pulses during deep sleep to drive tissue regeneration. DNA repair enzymes peak at specific circadian phases. matching their activity to the phases when the damage they repair is most likely to have accumulated. Morning sunlight, 10,000 to 100,000 lux, the intensity available outdoors, synchronizes this clock. Without the light signal, in a person who stays indoors under artificial light at 300 to 500 lux, the clock drifts. The drift is small on any single day, minutes, not hours. But the drift compounds. Repair cycles miss time. The lymphatic system activates during a sleep phase that does not produce the slow wave oscillations it requires to function at full capacity. Immune surveillance peaks when no pathogen processing is scheduled. DNA repair enzymes activate when the damage they target has not yet accumulated. The entropy fighting machinery is running, but running out of sync. The parts are not coordinated. The maintenance crew arrives after the factory has closed for the night. The repair that would have been efficient at the right time becomes inefficient at the wrong time, and the efficiency loss, compounded across every circadian cycle for years, produces a body that is fighting entropy with all the right machinery on all the wrong schedules. Sunlight is not a health tip. It is the timing signal for the entire entropy fighting operation. A body fighting entropy on a synchronized schedule accumulates damage more slowly than a body fighting on a drifting one. Because the synchronized body repairs each category of damage during the window when the repair enzymes, the energy supply, and the autonomic state are all optimized for that specific repair. The desynchronized body is doing identical repairs with identical machinery at the wrong time, and the efficiency loss compounds across every circadian cycle for years. Now, sleep. Because the body fights entropy on 2 shifts, and the night shift is when most of the actual repair happens. Day shift handles immediate demands: movement, cognition, immune surveillance, metabolic processing. Night shift handles accumulated damage, protein clearance, DNA repair, memory consolidation, synaptic pruning, immune system recalibration. The 2 shifts require different autonomic states, different hormonal environments, different brain states. They cannot run simultaneously. Sympathetic activation for day, parasympathetic for night, cortisol for day, melatonin and growth hormone for night, conscious processing for day, slow wave and REM cycling for night. Sleep is when the night shift clocks in. The lymphatic system, described in the sleep position discussion, expands the interstitial space by approximately 60% during deep sleep and flushes the metabolic debris that accumulated during waking hours. Amyloid beta, tau protein, alpha-synuclein, the molecular waste products of neural activity that are implicated in neurodegenerative disease, are cleared during sleep. Only during sleep. The daytime brain cannot run the lymphatic system at full capacity because the interstitial space is compressed during waking consciousness. The cleaning crew requires the brain to be offline. Sleep provides the offline window. Skip the night shift, and the waste accumulates. One night of poor sleep leaves a measurable increase in cerebrospinal amyloid beta the following morning. The increase is small. It reverses with the next adequate night of sleep. But the person who sleeps poorly for years, who consistently shortchanges the night shift by an hour or 2, accumulates the waste that adequate sleep would have cleared. Every hour of lost sleep is an hour. The entropy-fighting night shift did not operate. The damage is not dramatic on any single night. It is incremental. It is cumulative. And it compounds across years into the cognitive decline, the immune weakening, and the chronic inflammation that the medical system treats as diseases of aging rather than consequences of an understaffed night shift. Well, and fasting is the scheduled maintenance window the body requires to audit its own machinery. Because constant fueling creates a specific problem for the entropy fight. When food is always available, the cell's nutrient sensor, mTOR, stays active, and the cell prioritizes growth and synthesis over repair. Autophagy, the cellular recycling program that identifies and degrades damaged components, is suppressed. Damaged mitochondria accumulate. Their electron transport chains leak reactive oxygen species that damage the DNA and proteins around them. Misfolded proteins aggregate. The cell is building new structures while the old structures are failing, a factory that never shuts down for maintenance. Fasting, a window long enough for mTOR to deactivate and AMPK to initiate autophagy, typically 12 to 18 hours depending on individual metabolism. Is the maintenance shutdown? The cell stops building and starts auditing. Damaged mitochondria are identified by membrane voltage measurement. A mitochondrion whose membrane potential has dropped below the functional threshold is tagged for degradation and recycled. Its components are broken down and used to build new mitochondria. Misfolded proteins are ubiquitinated, tagged with a molecular marker, and directed to the proteasome for degradation. The cell's machinery is cleaned, inspected, and restored. The process is not random. It is targeted. The cell identifies specifically which components have degraded below functional threshold and removes them while preserving the components that are still performing. Second law generates damage continuously. Autophagy clears it periodically. Remove the clearing period. Eat constantly from waking to sleeping, maintaining mTOR activation across the entire day, and the damage accumulates faster than baseline repair can address. The damaged mitochondria that autophagy would have recycled remain in the cell, leaking reactive oxygen species that damage neighboring structures. The misfolded proteins that the proteasome would have degraded aggregate into clumps that interfere with cellular function. The factory runs without ever shutting down for maintenance, and the machinery degrades while new machinery is being built alongside it. Consider social connection. Because the hormonal environment the body fights entropy and determines how fast entropy wins. And loneliness changes that environment in a specific, measurable direction. Loneliness increases circulating cortisol, the primary glucocorticoid stress hormone. Chronic cortisol elevation accelerates entropy in every system it touches. Cortisol suppresses immune surveillance. Fewer natural killer cells patrolling for cancer cells, fewer lymphocytes responding to infections. Disordered cells that the immune system would have cleared survive and proliferate. Cortisol accelerates glycation, the non-enzymatic binding of glucose to proteins that produces irreversible crosslinks in collagen, making arteries stiff, joints rigid, lenses opaque. Ordered protein structures become permanently disordered. The definition of entropy at the molecular level. Cortisol shortens telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that determine how many times a cell can divide before it stops. Each division with shortened telomeres produces a cell with less capacity to maintain itself. Social connection reduces cortisol through a specific mechanism. Oxytocin, released during physical contact, sustained eye contact, and trusted companionship, directly suppresses the HPA axis. The person who maintains close social connection is not merely emotionally healthier, they are thermodynamically healthier. The rate of disorder accumulation in their immune system, their connective tissue, and their chromosomes is measurably slower than in the person who is isolated. The feeling that loneliness is aging you faster is not a metaphor. It is the body reporting an accurate thermodynamic assessment. Entropy is accelerating in your cortisol-sensitive systems because the hormonal environment has shifted in the direction that favors disorder. Person over 65 who lost a spouse, who sees friends less frequently, who spends more hours alone than at any previous point in their life, is experiencing accelerated entropy in every cortisol-sensitive system. The intervention is not psychological. It is hormonal. Physical contact, eye contact, trusted presence. These produce oxytocin, which suppresses cortisol, which slows the rate at which the second law wins in the immune system, the connective tissue, and the chromosomes. Connection is not an emotional luxury. It is a thermodynamic input. And then, breathing. Because the fuel delivery system for the entire entropy fight operates through a gas exchange mechanism that most people are quietly impairing without knowing it. Your body produces carbon dioxide as a byproduct of every metabolic reaction that fights entropy. Every ATP molecule consumed releases CO2. This CO2 is not waste. It is the signal, described in the breath hold discussion, that tells hemoglobin to release oxygen at the tissues through the Bohr effect. Adequate CO2 means the dissociation curve sits in the right position and hemoglobin releases oxygen efficiently at the capillary level. Insufficient CO2. From chronic overbreathing, from shallow rapid upper chest breathing driven by low-grade anxiety, shifts the curve left. Hemoglobin grips its oxygen tighter, delivers less to the cells that need it. A person who chronically overbreathes is delivering less oxygen per breath to the mitochondria that are fighting entropy on their behalf. Less oxygen means less ATP production per breath cycle. Each mitochondrion runs at reduced capacity because the substrate it needs for oxidative phosphorylation is arriving at a lower partial pressure than the Bohr effect would deliver if CO2 were adequate. The entropy-fighting machinery runs on a reduced energy supply. The second law does not slow down because the fuel delivery is impaired. The damage rate stays constant. Every protein is still being pressed toward misfolding, every membrane toward leaking, every chromosome toward error at the rate the second law dictates. The repair rate drops because repair requires ATP, and ATP production requires oxygen, and oxygen delivery requires CO2. And CO2 has been blown off by a breathing pattern. The person does not know is wrong. The ratio shifts. Damage exceeds repair by a margin that widens with every breath that delivers less oxygen than the tissues require. Consider what that means for the person over 65 with mild anxiety, with habitual mouth breathing, with the shallow rapid pattern that decades of low-grade stress have normalized. Nasal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, adequate CO2 tolerance. These are fuel delivery optimization for the entropy-fighting operation running in every cell of your body. The breath hold discussion covered the Bohr effect in isolation. Here it connects to the framework. The dissociation curve position determines how much oxygen reaches the machinery doing the repairs. The curve position is determined by CO2. CO2 is determined by breathing pattern. Breathing pattern is the one variable in the entire entropy-fighting operation that you control with every breath and that most people have never been taught to optimize. Think about controlled stress. Brief cold exposure, heat exposure, intense exercise, because these activate a repair mechanism that the baseline entropy fight does not trigger. And the mechanism explains why the person who occasionally stresses their body ages more slowly than the person who protects their body from all stress. A small controlled stress produces a repair response disproportionate to the damage the stress caused. This is hormesis, the biological principle where a low dose of a stressor activates repair pathways that overshoot, leaving the organism in better condition than before the stress. Heat shock proteins, produced during fever, sauna, and vigorous exercise. Refold damaged proteins that accumulated under normal operating conditions. The heat did not cause the protein damage. The protein damage was accumulating from the second law's continuous pressure on every protein in the body. The heat triggered the repair of pre-existing damage that baseline maintenance was tolerating. Damage that had accumulated below the threshold that would trigger normal repair, but above the threshold that heat-shock proteins address when activated. Cold exposure activates brown fat thermogenesis, norepinephrine surges that prime immune surveillance, and anti-inflammatory cytokine profiles that address pre-existing inflammation. The baseline immune response was tolerating. The cold did not cause the inflammation. The inflammation was there, low-grade, chronic, the product of the second law operating on immune proteins and inflammatory mediators over time. The cold triggered an anti-inflammatory response that cleared what normal maintenance was living with. Hormesis is the body's maintenance override, a stress signal that tells the entropy-fighting machinery to run at emergency capacity for a period, clearing accumulated damage that normal maintenance missed. A body that never experiences controlled stress never triggers the override. Baseline maintenance runs at its normal capacity. The accumulated backlog grows. Damage that baseline repair tolerates but does not clear, accumulating across months and years. The second law wins by increments in the systems the override would have serviced. The cold shower, the sauna, the sprint, the vigorous garden session that leaves you breathing hard. These are override triggers for an entropy-fighting system that has a higher gear it will not shift into without a reason. The reason is stress. Brief, controlled, recovered from. The recovery is when the repair overshoots. The overshoot is the benefit. That framework, movement providing maintenance signals, sunlight synchronizing the repair schedule, sleep staffing the night shift, fasting triggering the cellular audit, social connection regulating the cortisol that accelerates entropy, breathing delivering the oxygen that fuels repair, and controlled stress activating the maintenance override, is the pattern I have been tracing across every previous discussion without naming it. Every mechanism described in every previous discussion. Wolff's Law, the Bohr effect, the glymphatic system, autophagy, the endothelium, the dissociation curve, the cortisol cascade, the circadian clock, the pink noise entrainment, the microbiome calibration, is a component of one operation. The operation is fighting entropy. The second law is the opponent. Your body is the opponent. Interventions that work because they support the fight. Every intervention that does not work because it is irrelevant to the fight. The supplement that promised to reverse aging but produced no measurable effect, irrelevant to the entropy fight. The exercise that promised to transform your body and delivered. It provided the mechanical signals that maintained order in systems the second law was pressing toward disorder. The difference between interventions that work and interventions that do not is whether they engage the physics. The physics is entropy. The engagement is either real or it is not. No marketing changes the physics. 7 interventions. 7 different words, 7 different experts, 7 different magazine articles. 1 law of physics. The second law of thermodynamics says disorder increases. Your body fights that increase every second it is alive. Every piece of health advice that has ever worked in a controlled study works because it supports that fight. Every piece that does not work because it is irrelevant to that fight. The filter is binary. Does this help the body maintain order against entropy? If yes, it matters. If no, it does not. Now, the filter. Because the framework gives you something no individual health recommendation ever provided, a way to evaluate every claim you encounter for the rest of your life. Person over 65 who has been overwhelmed by contradictory health advice, eat this, avoid that, exercise this way, take this supplement, try this protocol, now has a filter. One question applied to every claim. Does it reduce the rate at which entropy accumulates, increase the rate at which the body repairs the entropy that has accumulated, or improve the coordination between the repair systems? If it does none of these, it does not matter. Regardless of how many experts recommend it, regardless of how many magazines feature it, regardless of how convincingly it is marketed. The physics does not care about marketing. The physics cares about the ratio between damage and repair. Next time someone offers you a health recommendation, a supplement, a device, a protocol, a diet, apply the filter. Does it provide a maintenance signal to a system that needs one? Does it synchronize the repair schedule? Does it staff the night shift? Does it trigger the cellular audit? Does it regulate the hormonal environment the fight occurs in? Does it optimize the fuel delivery? Does it activate the repair override? If it does, none of these, if it cannot be connected to the entropy fight through a specific, identifiable mechanism, then it is noise. The interventions that survive this filter are the ones that work. They are the ones that every longevity study, every centenarian population, every honest clinician converges on. The convergence is not coincidence. The convergence is physics. It was always entropy. The second law of thermodynamics was written into the structure of the universe 14 billion years ago. It governs the cooling of stars, the erosion of mountains, the decay of every ordered structure that has ever existed. It has never been violated. It cannot be negotiated with. And it is acting on every cell in your body right now, pressing every protein toward misfolding, every membrane toward leaking, every chromosome toward error, every ordered structure toward disorder. Everything you do that keeps you alive is one act, spending energy to push back against that pressure, moving so the bones receive the signal to maintain themselves, sleeping so the repair crew can clear the molecular debris, eating so the machinery has fuel, fasting so the machinery can audit itself, connecting so the cortisol does not accelerate the clock, breathing so the oxygen reaches the cells doing the work, stressing briefly so the repair override clears the backlog. One law, one fight, one body. You have been fighting the second law since the day you were born. You will fight it until the day you stop. The fight cannot be won permanently. The second law does not lose. It can be fought well. It can be fought with every input the body was designed to receive: mechanical stress, morning light, deep sleep, periodic fasting, human contact, adequate oxygen, occasional controlled stress. These are not 7 different health tips from 7 different experts. They are 7 ways to support one operation. The operation is maintaining order against thermodynamic pressure. The pressure is permanent. The support is daily. Every morning you stand up, walk outside, feel the sun on your face, breathe through your nose, and sit down with someone you trust. You are winning. The second law does not count years. It counts today. And today you fought it.